This is the front output shaft, and it consists of the shaft with gears for the slider, large or large gear, small gear, and then the selector slider that goes between. Now the front output shaft is only used when you're in four-wheel drive and you have four-wheel low, which is this gear, and four-wheel high, which is this gear. The shaft has the gear put on this way, and it's held in place by a bearing that has to be pressed on. The selector is put on. I always put mine on with the numbers, which you can see facing downward, and then the four-wheel drive high gear again with the selector portion facing down, and then these are held in place by another bearing which needs to be pressed on. Both the lower bearing and the upper bearing are the same. Most directions don't tell you that, but the bearing number is M86649, and this one has an RN, although some of them will just have an N. And they're both the same exact bearing. The lower bearing race or cone fits in the case like that, and if you're pressing the bearings on, it's probably best to put this in first. You might have to help it down with a block of wood. This is the bearing after it's been properly seated. Now I'm going to press this bearing on. I have the bearing supported with a socket, the large gear on, and it will be able to swing up as this shaft comes down. And now we're going to try to press it on. That seems to be all the way. The bearing still spins, the gear still spins. Seems to be seated. Now we're ready to press on the top bearing. I have the bearing in place, the shaft is supported, the gears and the slider are on, and we'll see if we can get this down pretty easily. Nope, it's not wanting to go. Now the bearing's seated all the way down, spins freely, as does the bottom one, as do the gears. Now we're putting on the backing plate with the shims. I'm using the shims that came out of this box because I figure they'll probably be fairly close to the appropriate ones to use. We're just putting this in loosely kind of hold everything in place till we get the front output housing on. This is the front output shaft housing and the shift rods. These are the detents that the nuts or the those 3/16 little bolts fit down into and detented into there. We're going to knock out the seal. Stubborn. Finally, and now we also have to remove the bearing race here. Which I guess I'll do off camera. Well, I finally got it out, but I ended up having to take it over to the press and press it out. And even that was kind of a bear. I don't know why the thing was in there so hard. I guess just years of use. Basically, there is no easy way to get these seals out. You have to hammer on them, screwdriver them, pull them with a whatever, pair of pliers. Eventually they do come out, but they are a bear. The old ones are out and the new ones are ready to go in. I always put a little bit of grease on the shafts to ease the seals onto them, and so they don't stick and tear the seal. Put a tiny bit inside the seal itself. Doesn't want to go on that one. And Finally. Now we can take this, try to push the seal a little bit farther on without tearing it. This isn't the best job. See if we can seat it. Let me go in and once we seat it. Definitely not the way I want it. The seal has become caught up on the shaft itself. It's really hard to push it back underneath. There is a plate on top of this which holds it all down. We can get this one a little easier. Yeah, that one went pretty well. If it leaks, I'll know where to go. Not the best. I'll put the front plate on and just screw down the nut. Now we'll put the new seal in. That's good. Now I'm going to attempt to seat this race. Very slow. May have to, well, I was right. Had to use the press to get that in. Use the old bearing race as a press tool to get it down seated correctly. Just going to put a little bit of grease on it so when we seat the bearing does have some lubrication to it. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on these shift rods to ease the shift forks onto them. I'm going to clean this up because it needs to seal pretty well.